The galaxy was old, older than most species could understand. Empires had risen and fallen across its spiral arms, leaving behind ruins and stories and warnings that younger races would discover millions of years later. The Galactic Covenant had existed for 3,000 years, a union of 47 different species spread across 12,000 worlds. They had mapped every corner of known space. They had every intelligent race. They believed they knew everything worth knowing. But there was one story that appeared in almost every culture, a myth, a legend passed down through generations like a warning or a prayer, the story of the Terrans. Ambassador Eth of the Dominion remembered the first time she heard the tale. She was just a child then, her crystalline exoskeleton still soft, and her 4 compound eyes still learning to focus. Her mother had gathered her and her siblings in their sleeping chamber, and she had spoken in a low voice about a species from a forgotten corner of the galaxy. They come from a death world, her mother had said, a planet of crushing gravity and poison air. The ground shakes beneath their feet. The sky burns with radiation. Predators hunt them from the moment they are born, and yet they survive. They adapt. They overcome. Young Eth had shivered at the words. Are they monsters? No, little one. They are something far more dangerous. They are survivors, and survivors never give up, never stop fighting, never accept defeat. Her mother's voice had dropped to a whisper. If you ever meet a Terran, run, because they will chase you to the ends of the universe and they will never ever stop. Now Eth was old. She had served the Covenant for 60 cycles as a diplomat, traveling between worlds and negotiating treaties. She had seen wonders that would make younger species weep with joy. She had witnessed horrors that still visited her in her dreams, but she had never seen a human. No one had, because humans did not exist. They were just a story, a myth, a legend. Until the came. The Horde appeared from the darkness between galaxies like a plague of living nightmares. Their ships were not built from metal or crystal like Covenant vessels. They were grown, massive organic constructs that pulsed with terrible life, filled with billions of bioengineered warriors designed for a single purpose: consumption. They did not conquer worlds. They devoured them. They stripped planets of resources, absorbed populations into their hive mind, and moved on to the next target. In the first year of the war, 18 colony worlds fell. Billions of Covenant citizens were killed or absorbed. The combined fleet, the greatest military force in known space, lost battle after battle against an enemy that seemed to have no weakness, no fear, no limit to its hunger. Admiral X commanded the remnants of that fleet. He was a species of warriors with hard shells and razor-sharp mandibles. His people had been soldiers for 10,000 years. They knew war better than most species knew peace, and even he could see no path to victory. The mathematics are simple, he told the High Council during an emergency session. At our current rate of loss, the Covenant will cease to exist within 5 cycles. We cannot win this war through conventional means. The council chamber erupted in panic. Representatives from dozens of species shouted over each other, their translation matrices struggling to keep up with the chaos. Some demanded immediate surrender. Others called for desperate last stands. A few suggested weapons of mass destruction that had been banned for centuries. Ambassador Eth sat quietly through the noise. She was thinking about the old stories, about death worlds and survivors and creatures that never stopped fighting. She was thinking about myths. There is another option, she said. The chamber fell silent, every eye turned toward her. The archives contain records of a region in the outer spiral arm, uncharted space. Our probe ships have attempted to enter it for centuries, but the gravitational anomalies and radiation storms make navigation impossible. She paused. According to legend, this is where the Terrans live. Admiral X made a clicking sound with his mandibles. It was laughter. Ambassador, we are facing extinction. This is not the time for children's stories. I am aware of our situation, Admiral. I am also aware that we have tried everything else. Our weapons cannot stop our strategies have failed. Our allies are falling one by one. Eth stood, her forearms spreading wide. What do we have to lose by sending a message into the void? If the humans are real, perhaps they will help us. If they are not, we are no worse off than before. The council debated for 3 days. In the end, desperation won over skepticism. A transmission was broadcast on every known frequency, aimed at the uncharted region where legends said Earth might be. This is the Galactic Covenant. We are under attack by an enemy we cannot defeat. If anyone receives this message, we beg you for assistance. Please help us. The message repeated every hour. Days passed, then weeks. Hope faded. They continued their advance and more worlds fell silent. Eth was beginning to accept that she had been wrong, that the stories were just stories after all, that her people would die clinging to a myth. Then 43 days after the transmission began, a response arrived. It came on a frequency that should not have existed, a wavelength so precise that Covenant scientists had to recalibrate their equipment just to receive it. The voice was strange, flat, speaking a language that the translation matrices struggled to process. This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Meridian. We have received your distress calls. We have been monitoring your situation for some time. A full response is being prepared, but we wanted to make contact first. Eth was in the council chamber when the message played. She watched the faces of her fellow representatives. She saw disbelief, fear, wonder, hope. We are coming to help, the human voice continued. Hold your positions. Do not surrender. We will be there in 17 standard cycles. The message ended. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. It could be a trick, Admiral X said finally. They are known for psychological warfare. They could be trying to give us false hope. Perhaps, Eth admitted. But the frequency alone suggests technology beyond anything we possess, beyond anything they possess. If this is a trick, it is an elaborate one. And if it is real? Eth thought of her mother's stories, of death worlds and survivors, of creatures that never stopped fighting. If it is real, she said slowly, then everything is about to change. The council voted to wait. They had no other choice. The combined fleet pulled back to defensive positions around the core worlds, buying time they did not have. Every day, they scanned the void for signs of the promised help. Every day, they watched more systems fall to the advance. On the 16th cycle, Ambassador Eth stood in the observation tower of the council station, staring out at the stars. She had not slept in days. Her crystalline body ached with exhaustion, but she could not look away from the darkness. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself. They said 17 cycles. Tomorrow we will know. She did not know if she was praying or simply hopping. She was not sure there was a difference anymore. Behind her, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere in the void, something was moving toward them, something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. The 17th cycle arrived with no fanfare. Ambassador Eth woke from a restless sleep, her compound eyes struggling to focus in the dim light of her quarters. She had dreamed of fire and darkness, of worlds burning and ships falling from the sky. The dreams had been with her for months now, ever since the war began. She was preparing for another day of waiting when the alarm started. The sound cut through the station like a blade, high and sharp and impossible to ignore. Eth ran to the command center, her crystalline legs carrying her faster than she thought possible. When she arrived, she found chaos. Officers from a dozen species were shouting at each other, their voices overlapping in a storm of fear and confusion. "What is happening?" she demanded. A young technician turned to face her. His mandibles were trembling. "Something just emerged from fold space. Something big. Our sensors cannot identify it." Eth pushed through the crowd to the main display. The holographic projection showed the space around the station, a three-dimensional map of stars and ships and orbital platforms. In the center of the display, a new contact had appeared. It was not like anything in the Covenant database. The ship was angular and aggressive, covered in plates of dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It bristled with weapons, more weapons than Eth had ever seen on a single vessel, and it was broadcasting a signal on the same impossible frequency they had received 17 cycles ago. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Meridian. We apologize for the delay. The route through the expanse was more difficult than expected, requesting permission to dock." The command center fell silent. Every eye turned to Admiral X, who stood frozen at his station. His mandibles had stopped clicking. His compound eyes were wide with something that might have been fear or wonder or both. "They came," he whispered. "They actually came." Eth stepped forward. "Admiral, we should respond. We should welcome them." X seemed to shake himself out of his shock. He straightened his posture and nodded. "You are right, Ambassador. This is a diplomatic matter. It should be your responsibility." An hour later, Eth stood in the docking bay with a team of translators and security officers. The airlock cycled, pressure equalizing between the station and the human ship. She found herself holding her breath as the door slowly opened. The human who stepped through was not what she expected. He was smaller than the legend suggested, perhaps 2 meters tall, with brown skin and dark hair cut close to his skull. His eyes were strange, soft and wet and constantly moving. He wore a uniform of deep blue with small metal symbols on his chest. When he saw her, he smiled. The expression startled her. Among most species, the baring of teeth was a sign of aggression, but there was nothing aggressive in this human's face. His eyes were warm, welcoming, even kind. "Ambassador Eth?" he asked. His voice was deeper than she expected, resonant in a way that vibrated through her crystal plating. "Yes, I am Ambassador Eth of the Dominion. On behalf of the Galactic Covenant, I welcome you to our space." She spread her 4 arms in the traditional gesture of peaceful greeting. "Though I must confess, Captain Hayes, many among us believed your species to be fictional." The human laughed. It was a strange sound, warm and genuine. "We have heard the same about you. My people spent centuries looking at the stars, wondering if anyone was out there. Turns out you were just very good at hiding." The negotiations that followed lasted 9 days. Captain Hayes met with the High Council, answered questions from dozens of species, and shared information about his people that left the Covenant representatives stunned. Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel only 40 years ago. In that time, they had colonized 7 star systems and built a fleet of hundreds of ships. Their population numbered 11 billion across all their territories. By Covenant standards, they were infants, a newborn civilization stumbling into a galaxy they did not understand. But they had come anyway. When they heard the distress calls, they had not hesitated. They had prepared a response immediately. "I do not understand," Admiral X said during one of the meetings. "You knew nothing about us. You had no alliance with the Covenant, no treaties, no obligations. Why risk your ships and your people to help strangers?" Captain Hayes considered the question. Behind him stood his senior officers, a diverse group of humans with different skin colors and body types, but the same strange softness in their eyes. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That is reason enough. But the risk, the cost. You are sending your fleet into a war you cannot fully understand, against an enemy you have never faced. Many of your people will die." "Yes, they will." Hayes did not look away. "And that is terrible, but it would be more terrible to sit safely at home while billions of innocent people are slaughtered. My species has learned some hard lessons over our history, Admiral. One of them is that silence in the face of evil is the same as support for evil." Eth watched this exchange with growing wonder. She had dealt with many species over her long career. She had seen courage and cowardice, wisdom and foolishness, kindness and cruelty, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The humans knew they were outmatched. They knew they were powerful and dangerous. They knew many of them would not survive. And they had come anyway. On the fifth day of negotiations, Captain Hayes shared information about the human fleet. What he revealed changed everything. "The Meridian is not our main force," he explained. "We came ahead to make contact and assess the situation. The full fleet is still being assembled at Earth." Admiral X leaned forward. "How many ships do you have, Captain?" "As of my last communication with Earth Command, approximately 12,000 combat vessels, another 6,000 in reserve and support roles. We can have the first wave here in 30 cycles." The council chamber went absolutely silent. Eth felt her primary heart skip a beat. 12,000 ships. The combined fleet of the Covenant, the greatest military force in known space, numbered only 8,000 vessels, and most of those were damaged or depleted from months of losing battles. "You have more ships than we do," X said slowly. "You are younger than us, smaller than us, and you have more ships." Hayes smiled that strange human smile. "We build fast. It is one of our talents." "What are your other talents?" The human captain glanced at his officers. Something passed between them, a silent communication that needed no words. "We are very good at surviving, Admiral, and we are very, very good at war." The alliance was formalized 3 days later. The Covenant and Earth signed treaties of mutual defense and cooperation. Human observers were assigned to Covenant ships, and Covenant representatives were invited aboard the Meridian to learn about human technology and tactics. Eth spent much of this time with Captain Hayes, asking questions and trying to understand these impossible people. She learned that humans lived short lives, barely a century on average. She learned that they had spent most of their history fighting each other, wars of incredible violence that had nearly destroyed their species multiple times. She learned that they had almost given up on the stars entirely, convinced that they were alone in the universe. "What changed?" she asked one evening. "What made you reach for the stars despite everything?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. They were standing in the observation lounge of the Meridian, looking out at the endless darkness of space. "Hope," he said finally. "Even when everything seemed impossible, there were always some of us who believed tomorrow could be better than today. We kept reaching because we could not accept a universe where reaching was pointless." Eth considered this. "And now that you know you are not alone." The human captain turned to face her. In his eyes, she saw something burning, a fire that would not be extinguished. "Now we have even more reason to hope, Ambassador, and even more reason to fight." The distress call came on the 12th day after the alliance was signed. The colony world of Prime was under attack. 200 million Covenant citizens lived there, mostly farmers and their families. 3 hive ships had appeared in orbit and begun landing troops on the surface. The message was desperate, panicked. The colonial defense forces were being overwhelmed. The bio-warriors were everywhere, consuming everything in their path. At the current rate, the entire population would be dead within 2 days. Admiral X received the transmission in the command center of the council station. He immediately began calculating response times. The nearest Covenant fleet was 18 cycles away. By the time they arrived, there would be nothing left to save. Captain Hayes was present when the message played. He listened without expression, his strange, soft eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the system. When the transmission ended, he turned to his communications officer. "Lieutenant, send a message to the Meridian. Tell them to prepare for immediate departure. Maximum speed to Prime." X looked at him sharply. "Captain, you cannot be serious. 1 ship against 3 hive vessels. That is not courage, that is suicide." "Maybe," Hayes admitted. "But those people are dying right now, Admiral. Every hour we spend talking is another hour of slaughter. I am not willing to wait." "The human fleet will arrive in 18 cycles. If you wait, you will have support. You will have a chance." Hayes shook his head. In 18 cycles, 200 million people will be dead. That is not acceptable. He turned and walked out of the command center before anyone could stop him. His officers followed without hesitation. Within the hour, the Meridian had broken orbit and was racing toward the system at speeds that made Covenant engineers gasp. Eth watched the ship disappear into fold space. She felt something strange in her chest, an emotion she could not quite name. Fear, perhaps, or wonder, or hope. "They will die," X said quietly. "One ship cannot defeat 3 hive vessels. It is impossible." "Perhaps," Eth replied, "but I am beginning to think that humans do not understand that word." The Meridian arrived in the system 14 hours later. The situation was worse than the distress call had suggested. The 3 hive ships had taken up positions in low orbit, their organic weapons platforms raining fire on the surface below. The colonial capital was already burning. Millions were already dead. Captain Hayes assessed the situation from his command chair. Around him, his crew worked in focused silence. There was no panic, no fear, no hesitation. They had trained for moments like this their entire lives. "Lieutenant Park," Hayes said calmly, "what is the status of the enemy vessels?" Lieutenant Park, the weapons officer, studied his displays. 3 hive ships, Captain, standard configuration. They are focused on the surface bombardment. I do not think they have noticed us yet. "Good, Commander Morgan. Bring us in close to the nearest target. Use the planet's magnetic field to mask our approach." Commander Lisa Morgan, the ship's pilot, nodded. "Understood, Captain. Beginning approach now." The Meridian slipped through the void like a ghost. It was a small ship by Covenant standards, but it was fast and agile in ways that larger vessels could not match. More importantly, it was equipped with weapons that they had never encountered. The first attack came without warning. The Meridian emerged from behind the planet's moon and fired a volley of kinetic projectiles directly at the nearest hive ship's nerve cluster. The rounds traveled at a significant fraction of light speed, too fast for the organic vessel to react. They punched through the living hull and detonated inside, shattering the creature's central nervous system. The hive ship screamed. It was a sound that should not have been possible in the vacuum of space, transmitted through some form of biological communication that Covenant scientists still did not understand. The other 2 vessels turned toward this unexpected threat, their weapons arrays coming online. Hayes did not give them time to respond. The Meridian was already moving, dancing through space in patterns that should have been impossible. Human ships used something called inertial dampeners, technology that allowed them to execute maneuvers that would have killed any crew without such protection. It must have looked like magic. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of constant movement, constant fire, constant danger. The Meridian took hits that would have destroyed lesser vessels. Hull breaches opened and were sealed. Systems failed and were bypassed. Crew members died at their stations, and their comrades stepped forward to take their places. Ensign Maria Santos was one of them. She was 23 years old, a junior engineer on her first deep space assignment. When a plasma burst tore through the engineering section, she was the closest to the breach. Without hesitation, she threw herself into the gap, using her own body to slow the decompression while the emergency bulkheads engaged. She saved 4 lives. The cost was her own. Captain Hayes learned of her death in the middle of the battle. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and continued fighting. By the 12th hour, 1 hive ship was dead, its massive form drifting lifeless in orbit. A second was badly damaged, bleeding atmosphere from dozens of wounds. It broke off its attack and fled into deep space, its hive mind broadcasting confusion and fear. The third ship tried a different approach. It accelerated directly toward the Meridian, attempting to ram the smaller vessel with its massive bulk. It was a desperate tactic, the action of a creature that had never known defeat and could not understand what was happening to it. Lieutenant Park put a nuclear warhead directly into its brain cavity. The explosion lit up the sky over Prime. Millions of survivors looked up from their hiding places and saw the fireball blossoming in the heavens. They did not know what it meant. They only knew that the bombardment had stopped. When the battle ended, the Meridian was barely functional. Its hull was with plasma burns. Half its weapons were offline. 3 crew members were dead, including young Ensign Santos. Captain Hayes broadcast a message to the surface. "This is the Earth vessel Meridian. The enemy has been destroyed. Medical and rescue teams are being deployed. You are safe now. We are here." The response came slowly. At first, the colonists could not believe what they were hearing. A single ship had defeated 3 hive vessels. It was impossible. It was a miracle. But as the hours passed and no more attacks came, they began to emerge from their shelters. They looked up at the sky and saw the tiny human ship orbiting above them, wounded but unbroken. They saw the shuttles descending with supplies and medical personnel. They saw the strange, soft-eyed creatures who stepped out of those shuttles and immediately began helping the injured. Admiral X watched the recordings from the safety of the Council Station, 18 cycles away. He saw the Meridian's impossible maneuvers. He saw the precision of its attacks. He saw the moment Ensign Santos sacrificed herself to save her. His mandibles had stopped clicking. His compound eyes were wet with a fluid his species only produced during moments of profound grief. 3 crew members, he said quietly. They lost 3 of their own to save 200 million strangers. Eth stood beside him. Yes. And the captain is already asking when the next battle will be. He wants to keep fighting. Yes. X was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost reverent. The old stories said humans were monsters, creatures without fear, without mercy, without limits. I thought they were exaggerations, tales to frighten children. And now, the Admiral turned to face her. In his ancient eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was hope. "Now I understand," he said. "The stories were not exaggerations. They were understatements. These humans are not monsters, Ambassador. They are something far more dangerous." "What?" X looked back at the display, at the tiny ship that had done the impossible. "They are heroes, and heroes change everything." The human fleet arrived on the 31st cycle, exactly as Captain Hayes had promised. Eth was in the observation tower when the first ships emerged from Fold space, and what she saw took her breath away. They came in waves. First the scouts, small fast vessels that spread out to secure the perimeter. Then the cruisers, angular ships bristling with weapons. Then the destroyers, the carriers, the support vessels. And finally, at the heart of the formation, the dreadnoughts. 12,000 ships, the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Covenant. And at its head flew a monster called the Constellation, a kilometer-long vessel that made everything around it look like toys. Admiral X stood beside Eth, watching the display with something like awe on his normally impassive face. His mandibles clicked in a rhythm she had never heard before. "I have served in the combined fleet for 60 cycles," he said quietly. "I have seen armadas that darken the stars, but I have never seen anything like this." "They build fast," Eth replied. "Captain Hayes told me it was one of their talents." "It is more than that, Ambassador. Look at their formation. Look at how they move together. This is not an army of individuals. This is a single organism with 12,000 parts." The human commander arrived at the Council Station 3 hours later. Fleet Admiral was 63 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen more battles than Eth could count. She moved with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for moments exactly like this. "Ladies and," she said to the assembled council, "thank you for receiving us. I understand you have been at war for some time. I am here to help you end it." Her briefing was short and direct. Human scouts had been observing the advance for weeks, mapping their movements and analyzing their tactics. They had identified weaknesses, patterns, opportunities. They had developed strategies that the Covenant had never considered. "They believe they are predators," Admiral explained. "They see the galaxy as a hunting ground and everything in it as prey. This is their greatest weakness. Predators do not expect prey to fight back. They do not know how to handle resistance. They break." "With respect, Admiral," one of the council members said, "we have been fighting back for cycles. They have not broken yet." Smiled. It was not the warm smile Captain Hayes had shown. It was something sharper, more dangerous. "You have been defending, reacting, trying to survive. That is not fighting back. That is waiting to die." She leaned forward. "We are not going to wait anymore. We are going to attack. And we are going to keep attacking until they understand that they are not the predators here. They are the prey." The counteroffensive began at the Battle of Station. 40 Hive ships had gathered there, preparing for a final push toward the Covenant's core worlds. They expected to face a broken enemy, a demoralized defense force that had been losing for months. Instead, they found the combined human Covenant fleet waiting for them. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human tactics were strange, aggressive, almost reckless by Covenant standards. They did not form defensive lines. They did not wait for the enemy to come to them. They attacked constantly from every direction at once. Captain Hayes, his scout ship repaired and upgraded with Covenant technology, led a strike force of fast attack vessels. They hit the flanks, disrupted their communications, destroyed their supply lines. Every time the hive mind tried to coordinate a response, Hayes was already somewhere else, causing chaos in a different sector. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Brooks commanded the destroyer Relentless. When a bioship broke through the line and headed for a civilian transport, he did not hesitate. His ship was already crippled, its engines failing and its weapons nearly depleted. But it still had mass. It still had momentum. Brooks rammed his vessel directly into the enemy's weapons array. The collision destroyed both ships, but it gave the transport enough time to escape. 1,200 civilians survived because one human decided their lives were worth more than his own. Chief Petty Officer Diana Cole led a boarding party onto an enemy vessel to rescue captured Covenant soldiers. The corridors were designed for creatures 3 times her size. The air was thick with spores that made her lungs burn. Warriors attacked from every direction, their bioweapons spraying acid and poison. Cole fought through all of it. She lost half her team, took wounds that would scar her for life, and refused to stop until every prisoner was freed. When she finally made it back to the extraction point, she was carrying an unconscious soldier on her back. 47 Covenant survivors owed their lives to her that day. When Eth met her later, she asked why Cole had risked so much for strangers. The human woman shrugged. Her face was covered in fresh bandages, and one of her arms was in a sling, but her eyes were calm, almost peaceful. "They needed help," she said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, 32 Hive ships were destroyed. The remaining 8 fled into deep space, their hive minds broadcasting signals the Covenant had never heard before from vessels. Fear, they were afraid. News of the victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in cycles, there was hope. The myths were real, the humans had come, and they were winning. Over the following months, the tide of war shifted decisively. Human engineers worked with Covenant scientists to develop new weapons and new strategies. Human soldiers trained alongside alien warriors, sharing techniques that had been refined through centuries of bloody conflict. Human diplomats reached out to neutral species, building a coalition that grew stronger with each passing day. Eth spent much of this time observing the humans, trying to understand what made them so effective. She had expected to find superior technology, advanced weapons, some secret advantage that explained their success. Instead, she found something far more surprising. The humans were afraid, all the time. They felt terror as keenly as any species in the Covenant, perhaps more so given their fragile bodies and short. They knew exactly how easily they could be killed. They fought anyway. They grieved for fallen comrades. They wept over lost friends. They carried the weight of every death with them, a burden that grew heavier with each battle. The cumulative trauma of war left deep scars on their minds and hearts. They kept fighting anyway. When Eth asked Captain Hayes how this was possible, he considered the question for a long moment before answering. Fear is not the enemy, Ambassador. Fear is a tool. It tells us what matters, what is worth protecting, what we cannot afford to lose. He paused. My species has learned over thousands of years of very bloody history that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and acting anyway. Because the alternative, surrendering to the thing we fear, never makes it better. But the cost, Eth pressed. So many of your people have died, how do you bear it? Hayes looked at her with those strange, soft eyes. There was pain there, she realized. Ancient pain, carried by every human she had ever met. But there was something else too, something that burned brighter than the pain. We bear it because we must, he said, because the people we have lost would want us to keep going, because giving up would make their sacrifice meaningless. He smiled, and it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. We honor the dead by protecting the living, Ambassador. That is the human way. Eth thought about this for a long time. She thought about all the species she had known, all the cultures she had studied, all the wars she had witnessed. She had seen courage before. She had seen sacrifice. But she had never seen anything quite like this. The humans did not fight because they were fearless. They did not sacrifice because they did not value their own lives. They fought and sacrificed because they valued other lives more, because they believed some things were worth dying for. It was the most alien thing she had ever encountered, and the most beautiful. The war ended at the... It took 18 months to push the enemy back across the galaxy, 18 months of constant battle and terrible loss. But finally, the combined fleet surrounded the last stronghold of the hive mind, and the end was in sight. The planet below was massive, covered in organic structures that pulsed with terrible life. This was where they had been born, where their hive mind had first awakened, where they had begun their long journey of consumption across the stars. Now it was surrounded by over 20,000 ships from dozens of species, all pointing their weapons at the heart of the enemy. Fleet Admiral stood on the bridge of the constellation, watching the planet turn slowly below. Beside her stood Captain Hayes, now promoted to Commodore for his actions during the war. His uniform bore new decorations, symbols of battles won and enemies defeated. But his eyes were the same as always, soft and thoughtful and endlessly watchful. The hive mind's final transmission echoed through the fleet. You cannot destroy us. We are eternal. We will consume you all. Today, tomorrow, in 1,000 cycles, we will return. Admiral's response was brief. We will be waiting. The bombardment lasted 6 days. Wave after wave of weapons fell upon the planet, destroying the organic factories and birthing chambers that had produced warriors for. The hive mind screamed as pieces of itself were burned away, its ancient consciousness fragmenting under the relentless assault. But the humans did not destroy everything. They could have. They had the firepower to reduce the entire planet to ash, to ensure that no would ever threaten the galaxy again. Some of the Covenant representatives urged them to do exactly that. Admiral refused. We are not murderers, she said firmly. We did not come here to commit genocide. We came here to end a threat. Those are not the same thing. Instead, the fleet targeted only the military structures, only the weapons platforms, only the systems that allowed them to wage war. When the bombardment ended, the hive mind was broken but not dead, contained but not destroyed, given the chance, perhaps, to evolve beyond the hunger that had driven it for so long. It was a mercy that many species did not understand, that had killed billions. They had consumed entire civilizations. Why should they be spared? Commodore Hayes explained it during the victory celebrations. Because that is who we choose to be, he said. My species spent thousands of years learning how to destroy. We became very good at it, too good. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. He paused. Now we are trying to learn something different, how to build, how to heal, how to be better than we were. But they will recover, one of the Covenant representatives protested. In time, they will rebuild. They will come for us again. Maybe, or maybe, given enough time, they will become something different, something better. Hayes shrugged. We cannot know the future, Ambassador. All we can do is make choices that we can live with. Genocide is not a choice I can live with, not even against an enemy like the... The formal peace was signed 3 months later. The Galactic Covenant and the Earth Federation established a permanent alliance, bound by treaties of mutual defense and cooperation. Trade routes opened between human space and the wider galaxy. Technologies were shared. Ideas were exchanged. A new era had begun. Ambassador Eth represented her people at the signing ceremony. She stood in the great hall of the council station, surrounded by delegates from dozens of species. Humans moved among them, shaking hands and exchanging greetings, their soft eyes and strange smiles becoming familiar sights across the Covenant. The human representative was a young diplomat named Tors. She had grown up on a colony world and never seen Earth with her own eyes. But when she spoke, she carried the weight of her entire species. We came to you as strangers, she said. Myths from the darkness between the stars. You did not know us. You had no reason to trust us, but you welcomed us anyway. You gave us a chance to prove ourselves. She paused, looking around the chamber at the many faces watching her. Today we are no longer strangers. We are partners, allies, friends. We have bled together, fought together, won together. And together we will build a future where no species has to face extinction alone. The applause that followed was thunderous. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy rose to their feet, their voices joining in a sound that transcended language and biology. For a moment, they were not or human. They were simply citizens of a galaxy that had chosen hope over fear. Later that evening, Eth found Commodore Hayes standing alone on an observation deck. He was staring out at the stars, his face unreadable in the dim light. You seem troubled, she said. Just thinking, he replied, about what comes next. The war is over, peace has been achieved. What more is there to consider? Hayes smiled that strange human smile. In the month since they had first met, Eth had learned to read its many variations. This one was thoughtful, perhaps a little sad. Ambassador, my species has been traveling between the stars for less than 50 years. In that time, we have gone from myth to reality. We have fought a war that everyone said was unwinnable. We have made friends we never imagined possible. He turned to face her. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. The beginning of what? I do not know. That is what makes it exciting. His eyes sparkled with something that might have been joy. Humanity has always been defined by our questions, not our answers. We are always asking what is over the next hill, beyond the next horizon, waiting in the next star system. Now we have a whole galaxy to explore, 1,000 species to learn from, endless possibilities we cannot even imagine yet. Eth considered this. She thought of her own children who would grow up in a galaxy transformed by human arrival. She thought of the stories they would tell their children and their children's children. The old myths would fade, replaced by new ones. Tales of the strange, soft-eyed creatures who came from a death world and refused to let anyone face extinction alone. I believe, she said slowly, that the new stories will be even more remarkable than the old ones. Hayes laughed. It was a warm sound full of genuine joy. Ambassador, I certainly hope so. They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the stars turn in their ancient dance. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited. New enemies, perhaps. New friends, certainly. New adventures that would test the limits of what humanity and their allies could achieve. But for now, this moment was enough. A moment of peace, hard-won and deeply precious. A moment to remember that even in the darkest times, hope could survive. That even against impossible odds, courage could prevail. That even strangers could become family if they were willing to fight for each other. The humans had been myths once. Stories to frighten children, legends from the darkness between the stars. Now they were real as the ships in orbit and the treaties on the table and the wounds that were slowly healing across 100 worlds. And they were just getting started. Eth looked at the human beside her, this representative of a species that had changed everything. She thought about all they had endured, all they had sacrificed, all they had achieved, and she realized something that made her crystal heart glow with warmth. The galaxy had feared the wrong thing. It had feared what humans might do if they were real. It should have feared what would happen if they never existed at all. Because in the end, the greatest gift humanity brought to the stars was not their weapons or their ships or their technology. It was something far more powerful, something the Covenant had almost forgotten during the long years of war. It was hope, simple, stubborn, unbreakable hope. And hope, Eth now understood, was the most dangerous weapon of all.